Hello everyone. Today is February 25th. Let's go over the major news you shouldn't miss from yesterday. Let's begin with the top financial headline. According to Bloomberg, a new 10% global tariff introduced by former President Donald Trump has officially taken effect, marking what some analysts call the rebuilding of America's tariff wall. This new import tax came into force on Tuesday after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Trump's earlier, broader tariff program. The White House says the move is intended to preserve the president's trade agenda. Last Friday, Trump signed an executive order authorizing a 10% import tariff and warned that the rate could later be raised to 15%. However, when the tariff took effect at 12:01 a.m. Tuesday, no order had been signed to increase it to 15%. The higher rate did not materialize. White House officials say a formal executive order to raise the global tariff to 15% is still being drafted, but no final timeline has been set for when, or whether, that increase will take effect. There are three important background points worth noting. First, has the United States' effective tariff level actually decreased? This is a question many people are asking. The answer is yes. Replacing the tariff struck down by the Supreme Court with a new 10% tariff results in a lower overall effective rate. Before the court ruling, the U.S. trade-weighted average tariff was estimated at between 13.8% and 15.3%. After the ruling removed some tariffs and the new 10% rate was applied, the effective average tariff fell to roughly 11.6% to 12%, a drop of about 3 percentage points. Second, what about tariffs on Chinese goods? Here as well, the overall level has declined, though unevenly. Some specific products remain heavily taxed. For example, Chinese electric vehicles still face tariffs of about 100%. Steel and aluminum tariffs remain above 50%. Previously imposed 10% reciprocal tariffs on China, along with a separate 10% fentanyl-related tariff, have been removed. In total, about 20% of tariffs were eliminated but only 10% was added back. As a result, tariffs on many Chinese products have effectively decreased, even though certain strategic sectors remain under heavy pressure. Third, why was only 10% implemented when Trump had talked about 15%? This question is widely discussed in U.S. media today. Most analysis focuses on two explanations. First, the Trump administration had been preparing for months for a possible Supreme Court ruling. The 10% tariff appears to be the result of detailed planning, while the 15% figure may have been a more spontaneous proposal. Last week, many outlets questioned why the administration seemed to shift between 10% and 15% after months of preparation. Based on the outcome, it appears that 10% was always the actual contingency plan. Second, analysts believe the announcement of a 15% tariff was a strategic move, more of a political signal than a concrete policy. By floating the higher number, Trump could demonstrate to both domestic audiences and international trading partners that he still controls tariff policy. In other words, while 10% is being implemented now, he retains the option to raise it later. This positioning could give him leverage in future trade negotiations with other countries. However, these explanations do not fully erase the broader perception that Trump's earlier tariff policy suffered a setback when it was struck down by the Supreme Court as unlawful. No replacement policy can completely offset that loss. Politically, this development could have negative implications for Republicans in the upcoming midterm elections. The second major story today is also related to tariffs. According to the Wall Street Journal, FedEx has filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government seeking a full refund of tariffs it paid under former President Trump's trade policies last year, along with interest. The logistics giant filed the case with the U.S. Court of International Trade. This follows last Friday's Supreme Court decision that struck down tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. FedEx's lawsuit has triggered a broader wave of legal action. Hundreds of companies are now filing claims to recover tariffs they paid on goods that were never actually imported into the United States. Major corporations joining the effort reportedly include Costco, consumer goods firms, and manufacturers such as Kawasaki. In total, hundreds of companies are expected to pursue similar claims. There are two key perspectives to consider regarding this development. First, what impact could this lawsuit have? This case has become a major focus of both U.S. and international media because it could significantly affect the American economy and global trade. At least 4 major consequences are already emerging. 1. A potential wave of refund claims from U.S. importers. Not all tariffs collected last year were imposed under emergency powers, but a substantial portion was. The Trump administration collected more than $200 billion in tariffs overall, with an estimated $130 billion to $175 billion tied specifically to the emergency law. FedEx is widely seen as the company that fired the first shot. Analysts believe few businesses will willingly give up the opportunity to reclaim those funds. There is also a major additional risk: American consumers themselves could file lawsuits. They could argue that illegal tariffs forced them to pay higher prices, and therefore they deserve compensation. If that happens, the legal battles could drag on for years. In other words, the chain reaction triggered by FedEx's lawsuit should not be underestimated. 2. Greater public awareness that presidential trade powers are limited. The case highlights that a U.S. president's authority over trade policy is not unlimited and can be constrained by the courts. This realization is becoming increasingly clear to the American public. 3. Intensifying conflict between the executive branch and the legal system. Some Democratic lawmakers in Congress are already proposing legislation requiring the government to complete tariff refunds within 180 days. That would prevent the administration from delaying repayment indefinitely. This sets the stage for a new political confrontation. 4. Major implications for global trade. Large multinational logistics companies like FedEx play a critical role in international commerce. Any restructuring of tariff rules or customs relationships could disrupt global supply chains and trade flows. Such changes could affect U.S. imports and exports, alter pricing dynamics, and even influence inflation in subtle ways. For these reasons, both American and international observers are paying close attention to the lawsuit. Second, how might Trump respond to a wave of refund demands? Last Friday, Trump made a revealing comment. He suggested that disputes over tariff refunds could entangle the U.S. government in legal battles lasting 5 years or more. That statement provides insight into his likely approach. In plain terms, it suggests the government may resist paying refunds quickly. Legal proceedings of this scale can easily take years to resolve. The administration could appeal lower court rulings, request additional hearings, and prolong the process. A 5-year timeline is entirely possible. And 5 years carries political implications. It would push the issue into the next presidential administration. Whether Congress or the Supreme Court would allow such prolonged delays remains uncertain, raising the possibility of further legal conflicts. Overall, the FedEx lawsuit exposes a deeper problem: instability and confusion within U.S. trade policy. For global investors and businesses, this likely means a period of continued uncertainty and volatility surrounding American trade decisions. The third major story today concerns the war in Ukraine. Today marks 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the beginning of the 5th year of the conflict. We'll look at 2 key developments, both reported by Reuters. Notably, major U.S. media outlets did not treat this anniversary as a top headline, while European media continue to view it as a major historical milestone. First report: Zelensky marks the anniversary and vows to keep fighting, while allies remain divided. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged international partners to continue supporting Ukraine's defense against Russia. However, divisions among European countries overshadowed the anniversary events. European Union members had hoped to reach agreement on a new package of sanctions against Russia and a proposed €90 billion loan to support Ukraine. But Hungary, which maintains closer ties with Moscow, vetoed both measures. Zelensky addressed the European Parliament via video, calling on all 27 EU member states to defend what he described as Europe's way of life. He also stated that joining the European Union after a peace agreement would be the best long-term security guarantee for Ukraine, and that Kyiv aims to be ready for membership by 2027. EU officials are currently discussing whether Ukraine could receive partial membership benefits even before completing the required economic, democratic, and judicial reforms. Several European leaders, including European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, and Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, attended a prayer ceremony with Zelensky at St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. However, unlike previous years, no leaders from major Western powers attended in person. Leaders from countries such as the United Kingdom, Germany, and France were notably absent. Second report, Kremlin says the conflict has become a broader confrontation with the West. The Kremlin stated that Western involvement in Ukraine has transformed the conflict into a wider confrontation between Russia and countries it believes are attempting to weaken or destroy it. For years after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that fighting continues, but Moscow remains open to achieving its goals through political and diplomatic means. He added that no details could be provided about a new round of negotiations with Ukraine, as plans have not yet been finalized. Analysis: Ukraine's international situation has changed fundamentally. On this fourth anniversary, Ukraine faces a very different global environment compared to earlier years of the war. The United States, previously Ukraine's most important external supporter, has significantly shifted its stance. Even neighboring countries now appear less committed than before. This highlights a fundamental reality: at its core, this is a war between Ukraine and Russia. External support has always been shaped by political interests. Countries can present many reasons to support Ukraine, and just as easily present reasons not to. For Ukrainians themselves, however, the situation offers no real choice. The options are essentially surrender or continued resistance. Ultimately, the future of the war depends primarily on the will of the Ukrainian people. The changing positions of Western countries over the past 4 years reflect a basic principle of international politics: every nation acts according to its own interests. Support is given when it aligns with those interests, and withdrawn when it no longer does. Let us hope that by 2026, this devastating war will finally come to an end. This has been Anti-Noise Intelligence, tracking the world so you stay ahead of it. Thank you for listening, and make sure to tune in again tomorrow.